you so much for your patience. We are just waiting on David Mattingly. He's in a bit of a transit situation, but he should be here in a little bit. So we're just going to start by actually asking folks to start to submit some questions. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask David, you can feel free to start submitting them.
Let's see. Let's actually down. Oh, there we go. Oh,
Yeah,
got it.
there we go. So you can feel free to put them in the main stage section. I imagine we're going to have a lot of folks who might have questions. So what I would just request is if you do have a question, please start your message off with the bolded word question, and then that'll allow us to be able to navigate in an easy fashion. So that would just be my request. But in the meantime, we're just going to hang a little bit tight as we're sorting things out on him joining. I guess to kind of give some background to folks as well. David Mattingly has actually been interviewed by both Bash and I before, both on our kind of respective podcasts. So we're familiar with him as a person, and he's quite the engaging guest. So we're very excited to have him here and very thankful for him generously donating his time. He's actually on vacation at the moment, but he still wanted to make sure that he was able to attend. And so because of that, we're very glad that he's still going to be joining us. I think one of the things I'll just mention as well, Bash kind of gave an overview at the kind of start of things in opening ceremonies, but David has a very long and illustrious career in terms of not only the Animorphs books, but also just in general as a digital mat artist. In the past, he actually worked at Disney and was part of an Oscar-nominated team for the film Black Hole back in the day. So it's very cool that we have an Academy Award nominated artist who is willing to join our little ShifterCon here. In particular, one of the things that is fantastic about David is his interest kind of started with the Planet of the Apes movies in terms of seeing some of the effects that they had and wondering, how did they make that? And so a lot of his work then focused on actually figuring out, okay, what is this digital mat thing, and how does that, impact films, and how is it done, et cetera. And it was his keenness on that led him to go into art school in particular. And the way in which he actually ended up joining Disney was he kind of cold called Disney itself to talk to who he thought was a certain illustrious person within the digital mat industry, and it turned out it was actually his son. But they had an engaging conversation, and he was actually invited to come and do a test sort of art test for them, and then they hired him on the spot, and the rest is kind of history from there. So we'll be getting into a lot of this, but I figure it's helpful context in particular to know kind of where he's come from and the kind of life that he's lived. He has a large passion for teaching in particular, I will mention, as he generally he works at two different universities now teaching art, both in the tri-state area, and overall has found that to be quite engaging, and has also authored a textbook around digital mat art painting. It's very close to my heart as someone who has done photo manipulation for the past 15 years, because there's a lot of similarities between the techniques. So he really is like a giant in his field. And of course, beyond the Animorphs covers, he's done covers for a lot of other different kind of books, including ones that have TF themes. So what you may not know is that he did some of the covers for some of the Choose Your Own Adventure stories, including one I think that's called Help, I've Turned Into a Monster. And that one actually has someone looking at a mirror, and there's a werewolf version of themselves in it. So he has dipped his toes into transformation art in a variety of different arenas, not just in Animorphs. But because of that, he is someone that we are just incredibly grateful to have. And again, I will just say he has always been very engaging in terms of being willing to interact with fans and kind of chat with them on very intimate / spontaneous mediums. And I think like his willingness to extend that availability forwards is a testament as well to him paying it forward in terms of how people gave him time when he was starting out trying to learn digital mat art painting and also joining Disney. Another thing I'll actually mention, because this is something that's on his bio, but a lot of people don't know. So his father invented the water pick. So he has used that pretty much every day ever since it was created, and very much, I think that's a very cool little fun fact about him as well. I see that we've been getting a few different questions, so really appreciate that. We have someone on hand who's kind of collecting them for us, so very much appreciate that, and feel free to keep them coming. We'll see how many we are able to get to. Obviously, Bash and myself, as we'll be interviewing David, we have experience in terms of chatting with him already and having interviewed him before, and so we have a number of questions that we'll be going through as part of the panel itself. And then once we've kind of exhausted that, we'll go to some of the audience questions and see what he thinks. I did see one that I wanted to touch on in terms of, I believe Gali asked, does anyone know if he's actually into TF himself? I hope he's not appalled by this fandom. So I wanted to say it's not something necessarily that he's directly into, but he is very much aware of the fandom, as I'm sure you can imagine, being the guest of honor at a ShifterCon and having been interviewed by multiple different TF people. One of the things that he kind of talked about in one of the interviews that I did with him, with my co-host Kay Libra on the TF Tuesday podcast, was he likened a lot of it to the kind of human interest in knowing what another person or being's life is like and wanting to put yourself in their shoes for a day and kind of explore. And so, even though he wouldn't say necessarily he has like a professed interest in it, it is a topic that fascinates him. And one of the things he mentioned in particular was, like, what if I was a cat for a day? What would that be like? And things like that. So again, it's very much a concept that he is familiar with, even if he doesn't like necessarily fully understand the nuances in the way that maybe us as folks who are immersed in it do. But regardless, he's definitely aware of it, and that was obviously part of the component in us asking him to be the guest of honor as well. Another question actually that I'll just mention. So I did see Azel asked what tools does he use to create his digital art, and obviously I'm going to let him speak to that a little bit as well. But there's a few different tools that he's talked about in his time in terms of creating digital mat art painting. One of the ones actually that comes up, of course, is Photoshop. Back when he started to use it, it was actually there was one backspace, like so you had one undo and one layer. That was it. There was no other functionality in Photoshop when he was starting at the time beyond those. So you really had to commit. It really was truly painting in terms of what you had access to and only having the one layer. So that's something that I will call out. I'll also mention that in terms of the Animorphs covers, so we actually used a program that doesn't really exist anymore to make those covers, Elastic Reality. It is one that he does not have a lot of love for, to be frank. He mentioned that he would never want to go back to using it, even though obviously it was quite useful. But oftentimes he would use that as a way to get the kind of general gist of the mid frames for those covers. And so because of that, sometimes he would actually use directly what was being kind of pulled out for like maybe the third stage, like 3 of 5. But the second and fourth, those were generally ones that were directly painted as part of the creation through Elastic Reality. There is kind of a replacement software now that he has used sparingly when he's made new ones. I think it's called something Nuke. I forget, but basically he does not miss Elastic Reality, is what he's said. And having tried to fiddle around with it a little bit too, I don't blame him. It's quite old and obtuse. So, yeah, I forget exactly what the name of the successor is, so maybe he will quote me or correct me on that. But there are successors to it that have been used and work a lot better, I will add. So, yeah. But yeah, in terms of, I guess, other things to expect, obviously, David Mattingly is of a different generation, so we may have some technical issues at the start, but he is still quite good and uh, uh, able to kind of adapt on the fly, and so we very much appreciate that. And I found him to be quite an engaging guest when he's come on in the past. I did see a question directly for me from US Duct Tape saying, between the TF Tuesday interview and now, what questions did you come up with for David that you are excited to ask for today? So there's a variety. Obviously, Bash and I, having interviewed him from different angles, had slightly different perspectives in terms of what we want to talk about. And I was very much keen to talk to him about my artistic process last time and how like that relates to his and how he's kind of approached things. But one of the things that I will mention is that he was very adamant in terms of talking about how his legacy kind of moves forward, because a lot of the art forms that he created at the time are sometimes, and I say this in like with massive air quotes, replicated by some of the artificial intelligence image generators that have popped up since. And so one of the things that he was very passionate about is saying that, obviously there are things that have come up since then that are now kind of obstacles for artists. And in terms of each generation facing a new challenge in terms of creating art and kind of contextualizing what does art mean to us in terms of how we make it. And so I'm very excited to talk to him a little bit about that as well, some more, because he very much felt that, especially as new artists are starting to kind of grapple with these problems, there is kind of a recentering of what does art mean when you make it and what does it mean to the audience, and how do you kind of recontextualize all of that in the context of a world where we're getting inundated with a lot of other things. So he had a lot of thoughts about that, and I thought that was a quite interesting topic as well. I see also there's a question about when did David find out about the TF fandom? So I kind of have an answer for that, so I'll maybe share that as well. He's been aware of it for a decent amount of time. This is not obviously his first rodeo, as I mentioned earlier, but also he is someone who has always been pretty keyed into like artistic spaces in particular. And so one of the things that he's mentioned in the past was that he was aware of people kind of replicating the style of like Animorphs transformation covers. And that was kind of the first kind of glimmer of, okay, so there's like an interest in this as like kind of a niche beyond just the books. One of the things that he really liked to do back when the books were still coming out was, he would get to go to parties and whatnot, and he'd be able to be like, so, like he'd be able to chat with the kids and be like, so what are you reading right now? Blah, blah, blah. And they might say Animorphs. And then he'd be like, I do the covers for those. And, the kids' eyes would like light up and they'd be like thrilled. So all of those things are fantastic. I believe we might actually have David joining us now. So let me invite folks to join us.
Wait, can you?
There we go.
Yes, we can see you.
Finally.
It's great to see you, David. How are you? Well, thank you. And I should explain, I'm in Amsterdam on vacation right now. So if you hear all the noise, that's the trams going by, and there's a fountain behind me. And we were actually just in Bruges today and rushing to get back in time for this. And then we had all these technical problems where I couldn't hear anyone. So thank goodness we finally got it all figured out. And I don't have a lot of experience. I have no experience on Discord, so I really didn't know anything about what to do. And thank goodness, Bash, for all your help on getting me on here.
Yeah, great that we finally got it working. So
yeah, very much appreciate that.
All right. Since I think I need to rest up a little bit trying to get everything together. So I guess Zilepo, if you want to do the introduction and ask the
Yeah,
first two questions,
absolutely.
then.
I've just been regaling the audience a little bit with some tales of your exploits, David, and talking a little bit about your journey. But maybe if you'd like to kind of give some background in terms of how you got into digital matte painting and what the pathway was towards getting involved with things like a black hole and such. I think folks would love to hear a little bit about that in your own words.
Sure. No, I went to art school. I originally thought I was going to be a comic artist, and my roommate in college in art school was a guy named Paul Chadwick, who did a very successful comic book series called Concrete. But I was never fast enough to be a comic book artist. So I started doing illustration, and I was always interested in science fiction illustration. And one of my idols was a painter named Frank Frazetta. And as a cover artist, you were able to work much more slowly than as a comic book artist. As a comic book artist, there's a premium paid on being able to work very fast. And I've never been particularly fast. I could do a cover every 10 days, something like that. And that was my natural rate. And that is not good enough for a comic artist. So the Disney thing, when Star Wars came out, I was just totally blown away by Star Wars. And there was a magazine called Starlog at the time. And I learned that this guy who I admired for a long time, named P.S. Ellenshaw or Peter Ellenshaw, worked at Disney Studios. So I cold called Disney Studios, and I got through to P.S. Ellenshaw. And I told him, I'd loved all of his work on Treasure Island and on Mary Poppins. And he very patiently explained that that was actually his father. And that he was P.S. Ellenshaw, whose name was Peter Ellenshaw, who later changed his name to Harrison Ellenshaw because of this confusion with his father, who was such a great math artist. And they were staffing up for the black hole. And he said, "You want to come in and show me your samples?" And I was 5 semesters into my education at Art Center. And I just dropped everything and went into Disney. And he said, "Well, can you start in 3 days?" And I dropped out of school and went to work at Disney. And during the time I was working at Disney, I was also accepting cover assignments. So that's how I ultimately got into doing book covers.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I think it's so interesting that you were able to kind of just go straight into production on a film on such short notice, and they were really excited to kind of have you join their team and build things out. When you were at Disney, I think I'm sure, of course, folks in the audience would be curious to know a little bit more about any other sort of projects you got to work on while you were there, and where those journeys may have taken you.
Well, this was a time when Disney was trying to break into the more adult film market, and The Black Hole was actually their first movie that was ever rated PG. And I worked on Tron briefly with Harrison Ellenshaw was actually the producer on that show. And Harrison Ellenshaw was just a fantastic boss. I always tell him that working for him first was really unfortunate because I expected all bosses to be that good and that understanding. And of course, none of them were. I mean, he was just wonderful and taught me so much. He and his father taught me so much about painting that I can't really I can't really express how much they mean to me. And I also went and worked at Weta on iRobot for a couple of months, and then I brought my wife over and we toured New Zealand. But ever since I started teaching, it's far more difficult for me to just drop everything and go and work on a matte painting project. So I've been doing less and less of matte painting, except for commercial jobs in New York City, which I still do occasionally, because they can fit in with my teaching schedule.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Bash, I don't know if you wanted to jump in here too.
Oh yeah, so you still are doing matte painting, right? Digital matte painting, like you said, you're teaching classes on that, and you already have a book for digital matte painting.
Yes, yeah, it's called the Digital Matte Painting Handbook, and unfortunately, it's out of print. But you can still get copies of it on eBay, and a good matte painter has a tremendous knowledge of perspective, of tone, of how to use texturing, and all of this, and that's what the book goes into to try and teach people how to how to do that stuff. And it's funny. The best matte paintings are not photorealistic. If you look at,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, sorry, tram is going on. If you look at Richard Estes' work, he's considered to be a photorealist, and his work would not really be particularly good for a matte artist. But if you look at Peter Ellenshaw's work, it's much more like Claude Monet's work. It's sort of impressionistic. The perspective has to be absolutely clean. But if you look at, for instance, his matte painting for Spartacus,
Mm-hmm.
it's much more like Claude Monet. All the tones are broken up. Not a lot of flat tones. Flat tones really don't work in movies very well, because in movies you've got all that film grain, and at least in the old days when you were painting on flash, you wouldn't have any film grain at all. So a matte artist had to learn how to basically break up an image so that it would match the production footage.
Okay. I remember the last time we chatted, you said that the very first con you attended as a kid was a comic convention in New York in 1968, I believe.
Yes, it was. Yeah, in New York City.
So you were there from the early days of the comics fandom as well, because the very first Comic Con was in New York, and just 4 years beforehand. So you were kind of there during the heyday.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and
That was before they had an artist alley, and you could actually go up to an artist and say, could you do a sketch for me? And they do a sketch for free. And I met a lot of my heroes. This guy named Jim Steranko was very influential on my career. And I also met another artist whose name was John Buscema, who drew Conan for years. And I've always really loved how he drew the human figure. I mean, he was just a marvelous, not terribly innovative. Steranko's work was completely innovative, but Hiroshima just drew so beautifully that he was a real influence on my career. Weet u de weg naar het Leidseplein? No, I'm being interviewed. Oh, you're being interviewed? Yeah. Oh, sorry about that. I'm sitting on the street in Amsterdam, and I guess these guys are coming up asking for directions, and I am definitely not the person to ask for directions in Amsterdam.
Right. Well,
that's great.
the funniest. Speaking of comics, the last time we spoke, it was announced, but they weren't released yet. The Animorphs graphic novels that were being adapted. Now, 4 years later, have you since seen or picked up any of the Animorph graphic novels?
I got to admit, I haven't. I probably should begin to that, and I'm very happy that Catherine Applegate has been able to continue with the life of this series. I got to admit, they repackaged everything with new covers, and I didn't particularly like the covers. And part of that may be that the covers replaced the covers that I had done. But they were lenticular screens, and you could bend them both ways. I just didn't particularly love them. So I
It's
wish
funny. I
they'd come back
think
to me.
I think I think the fans were saying the same thing because after the lenticular screen things didn't work out, they start I have it right there. They re-released all your covers in a collector tin box.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like people missed your covers. Your covers were the iconic feature of the books, and they preferred the original covers more than the new covers that they were trying to market.
Yeah. Well, I do know companies need to repackage things so that they look new. It does like if you've got the old covers on it, and people see that, it's like, oh, I don't need to pick that up anymore. So periodically, in order to keep books fresh, they've got to repackage them. But I got to admit, I liked my covers better than the repackaging covers.
Well,
I think the fans
speaking
did
of
too.
Catherine, we actually reached out to her, and she tells us to say hello to you and to say that your covers were brilliant and iconic.
Well, yeah, she's been very kind to me. As an illustrator, you don't always have contact with the authors. But Catherine Applegate was an exception. She sent me a Christmas present while I was doing it, and was always very kind and very nice about the work that I did on her covers. So, all I can say is right back to you. I really appreciated the opportunity to do her covers.
So it's very nice that she was in communication and sent like the Christmas gifts. But I remember you also saying that based on different publishers, the interaction between the author and the cover artist is sometimes like restricted or cut off. What was the relationship with Scholastics?
It's forbidden. If I just out of the blue contact an author to ask them about the cover, the problem is a lot of times an author will have a lot of ideas about their book. I mean, they've been sitting there writing the book for a year or 2 years or something like that, and what they really want on their cover is an illustration of their book. And the book companies think of the covers as selling tools. And I've periodically been to conventions where authors would be complaining about their covers and saying, "Oh, this cover is inaccurate to my book." And then I'd look at the cover, and if the cover was terrific, the only way you would discover that this cover was not accurate to what the content of the book was is after you bought the book. So, authors should complain if they get a terrible cover that is really lousy and people don't want to pick it up. If you get a cover, like a Frazetta cover or something like that, I mean, it is terrific if you've got a character that has one arm or something, and the illustrator hasn't been told that, and so he illustrates the character as having two arms. I mean, that's an obvious boo-boo. But, the illustrator's job is really to come up with a good cover that will sell the book. It isn't necessarily to illustrate the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Well,
no, absolutely.
I mean, there's an obvious case of, I think when the kids morph, they have special outfits on. And
Yes, they do.
Working in street clothing, and that's an obvious violation of the actual books. But we weren't going to have the kids all morphing in skin tight outfits or something like that, and we certainly weren't going to have them morphing naked. So, in spite of the fact that in the books they don't morph with their street clothing on, that was a necessary thing. Just to make the covers acceptable to book covers and to the readership. The readership on these books, they were YA books. They weren't marketed for adults.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Speaking of those covers, I know we've talked about it before, but I think for the sake of the audience, I know that you kind of were approached at the time to make the covers in part because of your familiarity with the digital realm, so to speak. So I'd love to like kind of hear your take on how you kind of like were brought into the project and making those covers as a whole.
Sure. Yeah, they've had a lot of trouble with the first couple of covers. They'd hired an illustrator who was actually trying to do the covers using 3D models, and that's still a very difficult thing to do today. But back then, this was 30 years ago when these first covers came out. It was really, really difficult. I mean, one of the problems is, if you're transforming a child into a horse, that the polygons have to be the same between the child and the target morph. So they brought this guy in, and he tried like the Dickens to give them the covers that they wanted, and they weren't wildly successful. And then they went with a painted cover for the third one that was Rachel morphing into a cat. And they decided, no, we really don't want painted covers. So the art director of Scholastic, whose name is Dave Tomasino, I think I was the only artist he knew who was working digitally at that point. So he called me in and showed me the project. And he said, well, have you done morphing before? And I actually hadn't ever done morphing before. So I said, oh, of course I've done morphing before. And, give me 3 or 4 days and I'll come back with a sample. So I overnighted a copy of the only morphing program at that time, which was called Elastic Reality. And I think I probably didn't sleep the entire weekend in order to produce a sample. And that's the cover for book, I'm going to say book 3, that's bias morphing into the hawk. And I brought in a sample, and the sample that I did was slightly different from what was used on the cover, but it was 90% there. And the art director looked at that and it was like, that's exactly what we need. And I had the advantage that I was not doing it in 3D, I was doing it in 2D. So, and also I'm a painter, so I wasn't taking the stuff directly out of Elastic Reality. I was taking, the gobbledygook that it gave me and then painting over it to make it look more like, a traditional morph. I periodically been asked to do morphs today, and I no longer use Elastic Reality. Elastic Reality, I think, is dead as a program. And now I use a program called Nuke. And, it's much easier. Elastic Reality was very frustrating because you set up all the morph points and get it all done. It would take you 3 or 4 hours to set that up. And then the thing would crash. And you'd open it up again. So it's lost all of the morph points. And it was like, I'm going to got to do the morph before this thing crashes. I mean, it was a very unstable program initially. So, but, if you're going to do morphings today, there's a whole, you can do it inside of After Effects with an add-on program. And the program that I really like and the one that I teach is what I call Nuke program. Oh, I want to mention one other thing. The art director who took over the series and actually designed the type was a lady named Karen Hudson. And she's one of my all-time favorite art directors. As an illustrator, you're very much at the service of who designs the type on your cover. I think some people think, that the illustrator actually does the type, and that's just not true. You turn in your cover illustration, and you hope that you're going to have a designer who's going to make you really look good. And I've always loved Karen's work. I mean, she's a wonderful designer, and all of the books were designed by her.
That's fantastic. Was there any covers that you got to do that really stood out as like one that was like you were super proud of, or like was your favorite to work on, or anything like that, of the like 50 plus ones you ended up doing?
Yeah, actually, the one of number 4 of Cassie morphing into the dolphin is far and away my favorite. And then probably my second favorite is of Rachel morphing into the bear. And I think that was 7. Is that right?
It is,
I
and
think so.
I actually have the sketches from that. I think,
Yeah,
yeah.
I really love that. And I should also mention a lot of people have complained that the kids don't look the same on all of the books. And part of the problem is that the kids would age out. They would look considerably different. I don't think kids that are 12, when they go from 12 to 14, they appreciate how different they can look. They look completely different. And the only model I used consistently throughout the entire series was the girl Cassie, because she managed to look basically the same from when I first photographed her right to the end. And all the rest of the models, I had to change them periodically during
So
the shoot, just because they look so different.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that's interesting that a lot of people don't know, and it's actually something that we artists don't use as much anymore. But the fact that you actually hired models to help you with posing everything out and getting everything started, which is something that I guess a lot of cover artists don't do anymore. Is the art of hiring models.
Yeah, no, we used to have the budgets for that. We would bill it back to the companies, and I would hire a professional photographer. For years, I worked with a photographer named Addie Passon, and she shot all of my covers over the years. But yeah, I mean, budgets have gotten much tighter lately, and you can't bill back models. And there were some famous models. There was a guy named Steve Holland who posed for all of the Doc Savage covers, and he made a really good life of just posing for artists. But yeah, now the expectation is that artists will be able to work without models, and I think that's really unfortunate. I think that having a really good model who can really bring something emotionally and in every other way to your cover was really an advantage.
And didn't you say you worked with Fabio for one of your covers as a model?
I did. I worked with Fabio on the Pellucidar covers. And I don't know if this story is appropriate to tell, but Fabio was a really handsome guy. And my photographer, this lady named Addie Passon, she was in her 60s. And when Fabio walked in, she would say, if that guy asked me to go to bed with him right now, I would. I mean, he was just astoundingly handsome and very cooperative. So yeah, I used him on the Edgar Rice Burroughs Pellucidar covers.
Well, one thing I think is interesting is even though you use models, I also like that you also sketched out the transformations as well, the step-by-step sequences, and you done a lot of different poses before you kind of figured it out.
Absolutely. I turn those in and get them approved by Scholastic before I would actually photograph the models. All of that would need to be determined, so I wasn't wasting time and shooting them in a lot of positions that weren't really necessary for the cover.
And if people are interested, so I remember from our past interview, you kind of lamented the fact that the art show has kind of disappeared from a lot of conventions. Since we're an online event, we kind of made our own digital art show. And if any attendees are interested, if you go to the Dealer's Den section, there is a section called David Mattingly Art Gallery. And there we have posted a lot of his sketches that he provided to us from from his time working on Animorphs. So if you want to see what the raw sketches look like, go there and check them out.
Sure. And,
Yeah, they're
you know,
really
I
good.
want to mention, I also sell signed number prints of the Animorphs covers on Etsy. If you go to Animorphs Artists, I have, you know, those covers in various sizes. And I also have a website. If you want to look at my website, and that has all of the like 2,000 paintings that I've done over the years. And that's just davidmattingly.com.
Yep, we have them linked. Actually, we have it linked in your gallery. So if you scroll up to the top of the gallery, both his website and eBay page are also there as well. And like I remember when we chatted 4 years ago, and you didn't publicly release any of the sketches, and you sent me the emails of some of the sketches, and I was like, wow, I'm seeing something amazing for the first time. And I was like, I remember asking you, oh, if you're willing to sell them, please let me know. And all of a sudden this year, I was surprised to see you start selling all your sketches on eBay. Was there a reason behind this? Because I could imagine like any museum would love to see some of these early sketches all collected together.
Yeah, no, the reason I'm selling them is my wife and I are downsizing. I'm 68 and my wife is 72. And we were trying to decide whether we were going to sell our house or whether we were going to put an elevator in the house. Because, you know, I live in a 3-story brownstone in Hoboken. And, you know, it has these very steep steps. And both of us are having little motion problems. So we ultimately decided to put it in an elevator. But, you know, I am aware that life is not infinite. And, you know, I would certainly like to find homes for some of this stuff, you know, like the sketches for the Animorph stuff and that sort of thing, you know, and my paintings also.
Well, if you're able to save any, you know, if fingers crossed, if we do a live event next year, we'll love you to bring some of them for an art show and have people auction on them. Because I think, honestly, I think you're underpricing yourself on eBay. There's a lot of fans who will be willing to support you financially for all the great art and childhoods you inspired.
Well, terrific. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the Animorphs covers, one of the things I find interesting, especially being a cover artist, is you have to adapt prose into a visual form. And oftentimes, authors don't visually represent the characters within their story. So it's kind of up to the cover artist to kind of create different characters. It's more interesting when you have to adapt science fiction or fantasy, and you're the first person to visually represent a monster or alien. Especially with the Animorphs, because they had Andalites, Taxons, Hork-Bajors, and you had to physically represent these alien species. So what was the process like for creating these species? Were you given initial notes or guides, or how did the process come about?
I was. The Animorphs books were very important books for Scholastic. And the more important the book is, the less freedom the illustrator is given. I do a lot of illustration for Bean books, and you know their attitude is you're given a manuscript, you're expected to read the manuscript, and then submit several sketches that the art director is able to choose from. But with Scholastic books, you know, these were really important books to them, and a lot of times Catherine Applegate's writing schedule was so fast and furious that I would just get a cover description rather than reading any of the books. So Scholastic would, you know, they'd give me a description of the taxons that I was supposed to work from, and you know, really full descriptions of all of the aliens. But you know, that's unusual. You know, for a lot of other lines, the science fiction books don't sell you know, so many copies that they're really important to their lines. And so the illustrator was given more freedom. But if you have a really important book in a line, for instance, if you're given a George R. R. Martin book, or you're given a Stephen King book, the art director will want to have a lot of say as to exactly what the image is. And also, if you're given a Stephen King book, what they want is they want Stephen King's name really big on the book and like a little tiny illustration inside of it. So, the more important the book, the less important the illustration is, and the less freedom the illustrator will have. With good reason. These are important, expensive books for any of these publishers.
Now, one of the things I don't think most of your modern, more recent fans realize is that you have an Easter egg of hiding your cat Orson in every single one of your book covers, including all the Animorphs book covers. So tell us, I guess, the process about how you decide to do this tribute to your cat, and some examples of how you were able to sneak Orson into a lot of these different covers.
Yeah, no, different publishers are more forgiving than others. And Scholastic asked me specifically not to make the cat so obvious. But Orson was a cat who's died. I don't know. She probably died 20 years ago, and I was just heartbroken over her death. I mean, she lived a good life. I think she lived to be 14 or something like that.
Wow.
But in all my life, I've had cats. And some cats you just totally fall in love with. We just had a cat pass away named Jackson, who I was very attached to. And I probably cried more at his death than I did at my parents' death. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, but your love for these creatures is so pure that it. And they're short-lived, even cats that live into their 20s, that's far less than a human being generally lives. So, this cat had a special emotional importance to me. And so I have put her in all of the covers after I did since she died. I think she died in 1994. So that would actually be 30 years ago. So any cover after 1994 will have her hidden somewhere. And, sometimes it's very hidden because the publisher doesn't want these Easter eggs in it. And the covers I do for Bane books, I have another trolley going by. The covers I do for Bane books, they don't really care if the cat is fairly easy to find. So it depends on the publisher, and I need to be sensitive about whether they allow that or not.
Did you ever get in any trouble for putting them in, or was that never really something that was caught?
Well, I started working digitally in 1992 when my wife and I got married, and it's so easy to remove part of an image. I generally put Orson in at the very end, so she's just a layer. So if a publisher objects to her, I can take her out, or I can make it so faint that you basically can't see her. So I haven't ever really gotten in trouble for putting her in a cover.
That's good. That's good.
One thing you mentioned that you love drawing is you said you love drawing more whimsical covers. I think famously, as outside of Animorphs, your painting of the wizard in the subway is a very famous painting. I think that's everyone loves. Tell us why you, I guess, like whimsy, and maybe what are some of your favorite more silly covers.
I think an illustrator.
Oh, is there a disconnection?
Oh, I don't think we can hear you now, David.
Oh yeah, I think. Okay, let's see. David, I think you're disconnected. Let's the audio.
Well, we just can't hear what he's saying.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh-oh.
Wonder why the audio's. Sorry, we can't hear your audio. We're going to try to figure it out. Give us a second.
I see a mute symbol on his end.
Yeah, I see the mute symbol. Okay.
Oh.
Maybe he's muting because of other stuff that's happening.
Oh, it was gone for a second. It's on mute again.
Can you hear me again?
Yes.
Now we hear you. Okay.
Yeah.
So
sorry, continue.
I think anything you don't get assigned, it's really fun when you get assigned that. And I think I'm relatively good. There's a cover I did for a Jonathan Carroll book called Land of Laughs. This is one of my favorite covers. And, that's funny. And then, all of those wizard covers, I think there's a humorous aspect to them. But, in general, I've been pigeonholed as doing spaceships and hardware and sort of manly stuff. And, I admit I don't necessarily do wonderful sensual womans like Frank Rosetta does. But when I got the Honor Harrington series, that actually worked out really well because they had wanted a woman who wasn't a sex pot, but was supposed to be a starship captain, fairly severe, but still attractive. So I've been able to do that series for David Weber with great success.
Were there any inspirations you looked to when you were kind of creating her design?
Creating the design for Animorphs?
No, for the one you were just mentioning with the Starship Captain. Honor
Harrington.
Well, my wife and I have just been here in Europe. We spent 7 days in Paris and 7 days in Amsterdam. And, I know when you're a young artist, it's hard to hear this, but really, scrape together your pennies and go to Paris and spend some time at the Louvre, and look at Ang and look at Da Vinci, and go to the Petit Palais where they've got some terrific paintings by Gustave Doré, and they've got the Musée d'Orsay. And those are all relatively close to each other in Paris. Mm-hmm. And then we came to Amsterdam because I wanted to see the Rembrandts they have here. And most famously, they have Rembrandt's Night Watch. And our artists many years ago, before they had photography and the internet and all of this stuff, would come and look at other painters, and it's just amazing how much you can learn about painting just by looking at what these other master artists have done over the years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Would you say that in terms of the work that you do outside of your cover work, are there any particular themes that you enjoy working within, or are those all very much tied to the professional work that you do?
I don't have any particular theme that I gravitate toward. I've always been a science fiction artist, science fiction and fantasy. If someone assigned me a romance, I'm probably not the guy to do that. There are so many people who do that better. Or, like a contemporary novel or a spy novel or something like that. And actually, in the detective novels, there was an artist named Bob McGinnis, whose work I loved, and he would just do the detective sitting around with a girl, and his covers were just so fabulous. If I was assigned one of those, I would really question, well, why does it get Bob McGinnis to do that rather than me? So, I gravitate towards that subject matter. just because, that's what I read as a kid, and that's what I still enjoy when I watch movies and, television stories. I enjoy fantasy.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the Animorphs, you started working. Your first cover for the Animorphs was the third book. That was one with Tobias turning into the red-tailed hawk.
Yeah.
You also mentioned one of the things that I guess kind of made you kind of appeal to you was the idea of him turning to a bird. You mentioned to me previously you like the idea of turning to a bird and flying. Like,
Oh
did you
yeah.
incorporate these things? I noticed you do draw a lot of bird transformations.
I did transformations that Scholastic gave me. And they we wanted to have a lot of variety in the creatures that the kids morphed into. So I didn't. I was very disappointed. I never got to do a cat. Some other artists got to do Rachel transforming into a cat. I would have loved to have done that one. But yeah, Scholastic told me what I was going to do for the most part. So I didn't really have a lot of choice in that. But yeah, some of the creatures, I think it was just the fantasy aspect of transforming into a dolphin or transforming into a bird. I mean, who among us hasn't had fantasies of being able to fly? I think that's just a natural human thing that we can all imagine. When we look up at the sky and we see birds flying around, it's like, gee, I would love to do that too.
Well, so now that you're in the last few years since you started to do more social media, especially on Twitter, I guess it's obvious you've interacted with the different types of transformation communities, furry communities. How has your reaction been to these different communities who've been inspired by your artwork?
I'm just so happy that people appreciate this stuff. With the furry community, I can totally understand, people's desire to be able to transform into something different. I mean, this human form, we're just stuck in it all of our lives. And it would be so wonderful to understand, what your cat and your dog or, an otter was thinking, or a donkey was thinking, or a horse was thinking. And we're stuck in this form, and we never really get to understand what these other creatures are thinking.
Yeah. No, I think that's something that very much is a draw for a lot of folks within this space. And in particular, seeing a lot of pieces of media, growing up and such that explore those kinds of themes, it makes people also kind of reconceptualize how they see the world around them. I guess then my question would almost be, as you've kind of like interacted with folks who have like been interested in this specific area, did it bring to mind any like specific sort of like interests of your own, or did it just kind of remain more of like a I guess intellectual thought exercise of interest?
Well, it has remained more of an intellectual thought interest. I mean, the one thing that I really have come to understand as I've gotten older is, the desire to morph into being a young person again. I mean, you're really like, as you get older, your knees get shot, and you don't have the energy you once had, and the sad thing about being older is you can remember all of the things you could do as a younger person. And, as a younger person, I had no sympathy for my parents as they were getting older. And of course, they both passed away. And I
Mhm.
wish that they would come back for a day and I can say, "Oh, mom, dad, I totally understand your feeling towards the end of your life." So yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
I would like to transform into a younger person. I would like to, when I view our cats and their agility around the house. Even as they get older. We had a 22-year-old cat who could still jump up onto the counters, and they're what, 18 inches high, and the counters have got to be 3 feet high. Just imagine a human being who could jump 12 feet. That that would be incredible. So
Yeah.
I certainly I certainly totally understand the transform community and their desire to have a different consciousness than we have right now.
Hmm.
Well,
As
if
someone
you
who's
had the
wearing
morphing cube, what animals would you like to transform into? Just curious.
A bird, or
Yeah.
even sea creature. When you think of a fish, I think I'd probably rather be a dolphin rather than a trout or something like that.
Hmm.
Just because it's a bigger creature.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I will say, as someone who's wearing a snow leopard mask right now, is delightful to hear your interest in the cat element. So I very much echo that. And I guess, as like I know you have like somewhat of an understanding of like the book series as a whole, and kind of there seems to be almost like an element of caution in terms of who gets the morphing powers throughout and such, and there's like kind of ruminations around like with great power comes great responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to that sort of element, how did you or did you have any thoughts on that sort of like messaging as well, or were you just kind of enamored more with like kind of the concepts and like what you could potentially do if you had it for yourself?
I think the latter.
Hmm.
I do know one of the central issues inside of the Animorph series is if you stayed in a morph too long, you would be trapped inside the animal body, and
Yeah.
that's what happened to Tobias. He
Yes.
he was trapped inside that red-tailed hawk. Uh, I got to admit, I kind of bypassed all of that just because of the magic of the idea of being able to transform into another creature.
Speaking of
Oh,
cats, there's
Yeah.
my cat right now.
No, that completely makes sense. Yeah, I think it's interesting as well because I know that there are definitely folks who, particularly from a transformation lens, were very interested in that idea of getting stuck on that other end and how that connected to that sense of self. So I know that's always been like a topic of discussion. So it's really interesting to hear kind of your perspective on that matter.
sure. Hey, you know what? You're going to see me moving to our hotel room primarily because my phone is down to 4%. So I've got
Oh,
to plug
geez.
it in so I don't
Okay.
I don't die before the Q&A happens.
Okay. Well, we could.
No,
Yeah.
I'll stay here. You'll get to see
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
actually walking to my hotel room.
Okay. Well, on their way, as you're walking back, we could start looking. We could start looking for audience questions, and we'll get.
Yeah.
And once you're situated, we could start with the Q&A session then.
Yeah.
Okay.
We actually have a bunch of them collected already. So I know we've touched on a few of them already, but maybe if you are able to think about it while you're walking, one of the questions we had was from an audience member, Weed Art, who was wondering if there was any covers in the run of Animorphs that you wanted to redo, if any.
You know, yeah, I don't see any that I really hate. So like any artist, I have complaints about various stuff. Oh, I've got to stop at the desk because they've got this thing where I've got to have a key to get up to my room.
Oh,
So
yes, yes.
let me just do that.
Yeah, you can
Um,
put on mute for a bit.
my wife has a not for those kids. She went to tell me you be elevator 107. Mattingly? You just go upstairs. Oh, no, this one. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
All good. But yeah, sorry, you were saying about how you were still very happy with the covers themselves.
Okay. Okay, the elevator. Oh, miss, it didn't take. Oh, miss, hello, hello. Miss, hello. I needed I needed to get up the elevator at 107. 107. Oh, yeah. But she pushed it, but it didn't take. I still can't get up. So I just need the elevator. There we go. Thank you. Have to get your key card. Yeah, no, she's not there. Okay, sorry. Okay. Okay, I'm back. Are you still there?
All good. Yeah, we're still here.
We're still here. Yep.
The magic of live entertainment, as it were. So, I know you said there weren't really any that caught your eye in terms of remaking or anything like that. Were there any that you think would have been more enjoyable to make with the current Nuke software, or is that just all of them?
No, it would be much more enjoyable to do it with Nuke rather than Elastic Reality, just because of this frustration of the program crashing.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So, here I am.
Oh, perfect.
I'm going to knock on my door. Kathleen,
And
I'm here. Okay. And I'm not going to let them. Are you decent? What, you're going to have people come down? I know. This is my wife, Kathleen.
It's wonderful to meet
Hello.
you.
I need the, I'm about to die. No. My phone is about to die. Oh, I know it's on before. Okay. I hope we've avoided disaster.
we'll allow you to have time to charge. Plug
Yeah.
it in.
Let me just plug this in. I'm going to put this down. Okay. Yeah, we're good.
Perfect.
And I was just at 2%, so it was just about to totally poop out. Okay, so if you have questions, I'm
Yes.
up for questions.
Fantastic. So we have another question from Denim and Venom, and the question is if you were consulted with for the Animorphs TV show, and if so, what your involvement was.
None whatsoever.
Okay, understandable.
I guess actually to follow up that, every time Animorphs is, I guess, considered for an adaptation or a potential film series, are you ever tapped for that, or are you out of the loop with any projects with the franchise?
Well, I'm out of the loop. I know Catherine Applegate is certainly involved with it, and I would love to do whatever work, and I do teach compositing, and a lot of the morphing would be a matter of compositing. So yeah, if they get that off the ground, I'm available to work on it.
Perfect. We had a question from Swatcher who asked that, everyone obviously starts out somewhere. When you were starting out, how did you get over imposter syndrome when trying to get involved in bigger budget projects?
Well, geez, I don't quite know how to answer that question. I just started working at Walt Disney Studios, just sort of out of luck, and then I wanted to be a cover artist, so I just started sending out samples. But I never particularly had imposter syndrome. This idea that you weren't weren't quite good enough.
Mhm.
I think every artist, as you look around, listen, these last 2 weeks, I've been looking at artists who are just so far above my achievement, or so far above the achievement of any contemporary artist. It just breaks your heart. You would just, if you took all of that to mind, you would just throw down your paintbrush and never do anything again. But, as an artist, it's sort of a lifelong experience, to look at other artists' work, get better, try and understand what makes your work valuable. Even as you look at these artists who you think as master artists, even
Mhm.
Claude Monet. I mean, it was only towards the relative end of his life where he really arrived at the subject matter that has made him famous, those water lilies.
Yeah.
So, you work your entire life and hope, well, something is going to click, and this is going to be a unique expression of my talents. I mean, I think that's the desire of every artist.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. And I think that's a great message as well to kind of take away. Um, we also had a question from Woodnote, which was asking, when creating the Animorphs covers, did you seek out any art pieces that also depicted transformation, or were you working more completely from scratch and finding other sources of inspiration?
I was working from scratch, and then the whole morphing thing was
Hmm.
really brand new. I remember when I saw Terminator 2, which had the first examples of morphing, where the policeman comes through the metal bar. And I had never seen anything like that before. And morphing really is a fairly simple concept, but no one had ever actually done it before. Before, when they did, for instance, with the Lon Chaney werewolf movies, what they actually did was they bound down Lon Chaney's face, and then
Hmm.
they would progressively put the makeup on. And that just was incredibly tedious. I mean, now you can actually have your actor and then have the werewolf makeup on him, and through
Right.
morphing, you can change the position of features and the mouth and all of the hair and all that. I mean, just look at that Michael Jackson black and white video with lots and lots of examples of what you can
Yeah.
do with morphing. So yeah, it's made a lot of these transformations a lot more realistic, and in some ways a lot easier to do. I still can't imagine having your head chained down so that you didn't change the position of it at all for like 12 hours to do
Yeah.
those werewolf shots in the early movies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a technical marvel what they were able to achieve back in the day, I would say, especially when you put it that way. So,
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. We have a question from Hamcon who asks, "How do you feel about some of your covers becoming infamous, like the cover of Rachel becoming a starfish?"
I'm not really familiar with how have they become infamous. I mean,
I,
I know they're used as memes,
yeah, they're used
but
as memes oftentimes,
and I,
and I think that's probably what they're alluding to.
Rachel into a
yeah,
mouse is also very popular. Lose.
Yeah, that one is, yeah.
yeah, no, I was super happy to see that on Saturday Night Live. But no, I'm never insulted by people being interested in my work, especially all of the Animorphs covers were done over 20 years ago. And for there to be all of this interest in them is really marvelous.
Awesome. We also had a question from Schrodinger's who asked, what would you say was the most difficult project you had to work on and what you took away from that experience?
Most difficult project. They all of the Animorphs covers were really quite wonderful, and they had a reasonable deadline. I think the worst project I've worked on as an illustrator were extremely short deadline projects. And when you're young, and when I was in my 20s, I would just work continuously on a project and not go to sleep. And there was one cover who was actually for Universal Studios, and they had a Conan the Barbarian ride, and they had a very short deadline on it. And I stayed up for 72 hours straight working on this cover. And even when you're 20, 72 hours, you're really a mess at the end of all that. So yeah, short deadlines are generally the things that make a project most difficult, and I never had a problem with that on the Animorph series.
Oh, that makes sense.
We have a question from Earth, who asks, you mentioned that you want to do comic art. What kind of comics did you want to do, and were you considering being involved with the Animorphs comic?
No, I wasn't asked about that. I mean, the problem is, to be a comic artist, you've got to be very fast, and I've never been particularly fast. Even some of the most famous comic artists like Jack Kirby, Kirby could do 3 pages a day. And even very slow comic artists. I remember Bernie Wrightson talking about, he was never particularly fast, and he could do about a page a day. If you can't do a page a day as a comic artist, you really aren't going to make a living. So, at this point in my life, I don't think comic art is in my future, especially because the style has changed. The guys who I admire, John Buscema, Alex Toth, all of these guys, they're older guys, and their style seems very conservative at this point. So probably my comic art style would be as conservative as those artists who I still admire so much.
No, that makes sense. And you're right. I think like the style in particular has changed a lot as, especially with the advent of more things becoming digital and such. It's just kind of created an entirely different sort of perspective on creating those pages and what kind of goes into them and the layout and such.
Yeah.
I guess speaking of like that kind of digitization, we had a question from Azel just around how you feel matte painting has changed in particular with like digital filmmaking now and HD video versus like how it was used in the past in like Planet of the Apes and such.
Well, it's a blessing and a curse. I think visual effects today are much better than they were in the past. But I like the look of some of those older movies. I love what Peter Ellenshaw did on Mary Poppins. And if Mary Poppins was done today, it would have been done completely differently. And I started my career working on glass, and no one is going to work on glass at this point. They'll do paintings in Photoshop in general. Those Photoshop layers will be imported into a compositing program. And one of the things about matte painting in the past is you couldn't move on a shot. It had to be a lock shot. I mean, you could move on it, but it was very expensive and difficult to do it that way. So now directors don't like to lock shots. You'll look at entire movies, and there will not be a single shot that is completely locked. And if you've noticed in television shows, I'm going to demonstrate this sort of thing. This just subtle movement on the camera. They'll do that all the time, and in the past, that was considered to be a mistake. If you had the camera moving around a little bit, it was like, put your camera on a tripod so that it's really not. But yeah, I mean, 40 years ago, if you had a mic boom come into a shot, it would completely destroy that shot, and they would need to do it over again. Today, with digital compositing, it is so easy to remove little things like if you're shooting in New York City and someone whips around the corner, and waves and says, "Hi, Mom." If that shot was good, people would, directors would still be able to do it because you'd be able to take out the offending person in the background. Right. It's so easy to manipulate images, and in some ways, the directors who I particularly like today, like Christopher Nolan. Those are directors who still insist on having something for the visual effects people to recognize or be able to build off for the set. I think the worst visual effects shots you get today are where the artists have nothing to work on. It's just somewhere we're reacting to a green screen, and they tell the poor actor, react to this. There's a monster coming at you. That requires some real acting. I still, when I tell my students to watch John Carpenter's The Thing, which I still think is one of the best monster horror movies I've ever seen, and one of the advantages is those actors had something to look at on the set. It wasn't just green screen. Now, admittedly, there was probably 20 guys on the floor underneath working wires, but they had something to react to on the set. And the visual effects artists, if they were trying to enhance the monsters or whatever, they would have something to build off of. And most famously, Chris Nolan had a full-sized version of the flying Batmobile on the set, and he wanted to use that exclusively. And then the visual effects people were able to show him shots where he couldn't tell whether that was the actual flying Batmobile or whether that was the flying Batmobile they had on the set. But those artists had, they had the metal surfaces, all of these things that they could actually build off, and that's why those shots ultimately looked so good.
Yeah.
See, we have a question from S who asks, are there any other morphs you wish you had a chance to do for Animorphs?
Oh, yeah. I still lament the chance that I never got to do that one of Rachel and the cat. I would have loved to have done that. But unfortunately, I was brought onto this series after that one was done. So I was never able to do a cat. I mean, I was able to do big cats, leopards and tigers and that sort of thing. And that was great. But, my wife and I have always had house cats. So it would have been nice to have a chance to do the house cat.
Well, actually, following up on that, which character would you like to draw transforming into a house cat? And what type of house cat?
Oh, Rachel. I loved working with her. I think I had to switch models later in this series, but the first girl who posed as Rachel, and she was actually on Reddit. Yeah. She's 35 or something, and people periodically write and ask me who the models were for this, and just for privacy, I've never been willing to reveal them. But this girl, came out and revealed herself. She's now a grown woman and has kids and all of that. So it was fun. But yeah, she was my favorite model to work with. And the other model I really loved working with was the woman who posed for Kathy.
It's actually interesting because when we last chatted 4 years ago, none of the models have went public. So the fact that the Rachel model was able to go on Reddit and do an AMA and you two reconnected that way, I think was kind of great.
Yeah.
Any of you guys who want to know who the Rachel model was, you can go on Reddit. She, of her own free will, chose to reveal that. So, yeah.
And we just linked it in the chat for the viewers. So
Yeah.
Okay.
We also had a question about if you had a favorite alien species from fiction in general.
Favorite alien species from I right offhand I can't think of any. I mean, I love the Thing in John Carpenter's The Thing, and that was actually a remake of a much earlier movie. But the alien was like a giant carrot. The alien was played by James Arness, who later went on to star in Gunsmoke. But yeah, in terms of aliens, that may well be my favorite. And there was no particular look. It was sort of like Animorphs. It was like the alien could touch a person and then basically become their likeness. So it was based on a John W. Campbell story called "Who Goes There," and it was sort of a pastiche, or I don't know if that's the correct word, of in the 1950s. They had that communist scare in the United States, and he had written this because you wouldn't know whether your neighbor had turned into a secret communist, and whether your neighbor had turned into the alien that was going to kill you.
Yeah. Oh, geez.
I guess kind of speaking of alien, or alien like stuff, the fact that a lot of the, I guess, morphs are kind of simple 1-to-1 when you transform into a four-limbed animals. But then when you had to transform to something a little more complex, like I guess when Axe was on the cover having a different set number of limbs, or my personal favorite ones, I love the Marco turning to a cockroach. One of my personal favorites. And even though, cockroaches are native to Earth, their bodies are very, very alien to the human form. It's very, very tricky to think about. So how is the process like, especially when you had to draw vastly different transformations on the two different ends of the scale?
Yeah. Those were some of the most difficult morphs to do. The ones where the creatures had a similar number of appendages, like the big cats or whatever. You would just take an arm and you would morph it into the leg of the big cat. But I think there was one where Axe had to morph into a mosquito. And
Yes.
that was particularly difficult to do because the mosquito had, a whole bunch of arms that came out. You had to figure out, well, where are those arms going to come out? Are they just going to come out of Axe's body, or his limbs are going to split apart and transform into those? So there was a lot of decisions when with a morph, you've actually got to decide, from what point are you going to get a morph into the other point? And if there's no obvious points in there, you've got to figure out, well, what am I going to do with those extra appendages on the morph target?
And I guess even characters with no appendages, like I really like the Cassie turning to a Yerk one as well. Actually, let me post the sketches up for people to see. Because the Yerks were also very, very, like, they're the main villains of it, but the fact that they are such an alien-looking slug and having to morph a human into that also seems a little complex, too.
Yeah. The Yerk didn't have any arms and legs, so I had to figure out how to get her arms to disappear into her body, and for it to look natural, and then it end up being the Yerk.
We also had another audience question from Kay Libra, just asking if there was a series or production that you've ever dreamed of being a part of to work on artistically.
I would love to do the Conan books, but I also I had a chance to do Edgar Rice Burroughs' Pellucidar, and Frank Frazetta had done those before I did, and I like my covers. But I still don't think it's going to make you forget about Frazetta's covers. And the seems like it would be for the Conan covers. You would need to take a completely unique tack into that in hopes that you would do the covers, differently or better than this wonderful artist. I remember uh, when Dolly Parton did a version of Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, and you, oh my God, that's going to be terrible. But it turns out it was actually quite marvelous because she took such a different tack in it that it was like, oh, that's a legitimate interpretation of it too. And I think when you're going up against covers that have already been done by a really great artist, you've got to figure out, what can I bring to this that's different than this great artist did in the past.
Yeah.
I feel like your whimsical style would really, really do well for Doctor Who covers, especially when they do the Doctor Who novelizations.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to do those. I mean, they've, for the most part, they've done montages. And, I've never been particularly drawn to montage covers. So, it would be a real space cover where it's an actual scene. And my friend Paul Chadwick brought up a term that I've always thought of, and that's called a real space montage, where you bring different scenes in a book into one cover. And even though that didn't occur at the same time, you make it look as though it's all occurred in the same space.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I would love to do the Doctor Who covers, and I think I could do them differently than they've been done in the past.
Well, actually, speaking of
Absolutely.
Doctor Who, we have a question from a Dalek in the chat. Were you aware of the transformation community before creating the Animorphs covers? When you discovered the community, how did you feel about it?
Well, no, I wasn't aware. I mean, I particularly wasn't aware of the furry community before before I got this assignment, and before I became aware of how popular the covers were. But I've had this discussion with my wife. The way I feel about things, a lot has to do with how I was brought up, and I had a mother who was very liberal and very understanding. So I grew up in a small town in Colorado, and I was still taught to not discriminate against people for races or creeds or how they felt about stuff. So yeah, the furry community just really seemed wonderful to me, and they brought together a lot of ideas that I myself have felt too. The extreme desire to know or become one of the wonderful wild creatures we have in the world.
I guess related, since it's similar to the question we just answered. MK3 asks, if you had a fursona, what animal would you be?
Well, I think I'd be a bird. I mean, I've always wanted to fly, and I sometimes have dreams where I'm flying, and I love those dreams. I only wish I could lie down and say, "Oh, tonight let's have a flying dream." But for some reason, my brain doesn't work that way. But I sometimes have flying dreams, and I love that. So if I could choose one animal, I would love to be able to fly.
Would there
What
be any
species of bird?
types of birds? Yeah.
Probably a hawk. I'd like to be a big bird. Just the vision of hawks going up and rotating around the thermals and that sort of thing. Probably not a goose. The goose paddles around in the water and then flies in formation with other things. One thing about the hawk is it's like he's not going to follow a bunch of other hawks to go somewhere.
Yeah, he's gonna do his own
Uh,
thing.
Just letting you know, there's an avian bird meetup in the other chat rooms, and they're excited that you mentioned you wanted to be a bird as well.
Oh, well, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. I also actually had an additional question, not necessarily an audience one, but I think it would be important to fit it in. There's a lot of folks in the audience who are artists of themselves, and obviously you're a very accomplished artist of your own right. I was curious if you had any advice for artists who are working on developing their skills and trying new things, and if you had any kind of pointers for them.
Yes, I would. And, it's the same thing I said before. Get to Europe. See, get to Paris. Get to Amsterdam to see the Rembrandts. Get to Spain. One thing that's really fascinating is some artists really reproduce well, and then some artists don't reproduce particularly well. And I was never really an admirer of Velasquez until my wife and I went to Spain and saw the original paintings. And, these guys back in 1600, 1700 didn't work for reproduction. So you've got to see the original paintings to see what they accomplished. So, one word of advice would be get to Europe. We have some good paintings in the United States, but they don't compare to what they've got in the Louvre and what they've got in the Rijksmuseum here in Amsterdam. So get see what artists have done in the past and draw. I paint periodically with a wonderful painter. He may be the best artist, the best figurative artist living in the United States today, a guy named SteveIssel. And Steve always says people love to paint, but they should actually be drawing. And drawing is the foundation of everything you do as an artist. The ability to reproduce a form, the ability to draw a face, get a likeness. I mean, these are all skills that are really hard to acquire. So just keep plugging away at that stuff.
Well, I guess as an artist myself, one of the things I have to deal with is artist block sometimes. Like sometimes I have an idea in my head that's really ready to go, but I just can't get it out. Do you deal with artist block, and how do you kind of overcome that?
Well, you realize that almost every artist encounters this thing where your vision of what you're going to produce does not match what you ultimately produce. And a lot of times, like the sketch I do that I turn in to the company, and then I do a finish, and the finish will seem much more stilted than the original sketch. The sketch will seem really fresh. Even when you look back at guys like Titian and Rubens, you see their sketches and they seem so energetic. They're not finished, but they have energy that just totally leaps off the board. And then you see the finish, and they've lost a little bit of that. One of the artists I really admire is Norman Rockwell, and I was reading Rockwell's books, and it's like Rockwell said that he couldn't stand to look at his own work because if he looked at his own work, all he saw were the imperfections in it, and it was like,
Right.
Norman Rockwell. I mean, that guy. You look at his paintings, it looks like he really accomplished everything. But of course, he was, his original vision for it was not totally reproduced and what he got as the final piece. So I think that's, if you ever get to the point where you say, oh, I totally nailed it. I've made it perfect. You're probably not a good artist. You always want your aspirations to exceed what you're able to do.
Yeah. We also actually had just an additional question that I want to fit in. And the question was about if you've ever considered doing any sort of anamorph-like covers with something that wasn't humanoid to creature, but was instead perhaps humanoid to like an object or vehicle. And if so, how would you have gone about doing so?
I haven't really thought about that. Once again, when you do a morph, you need to determine the morph points. So, like,
Right.
if you're going to do a human being into a car, it's like, well, where do you put the arms and legs? Where do you put the eyes? The morphs that are really successful are the ones where there's obvious morph points that you can see continue throughout the morph. And there are, transfer someone into a refrigerator. Where do the morph parts go? I just don't think you're going to get beautiful morphs with that. I mean,
Oh
you
no,
might be able to do it with like a Volkswagen. You could put the
yeah.
eyes into the headlights and the mouth into the grill and the nose into the hood ornament or something like that. But
Mhm.
yeah, it doesn't seem like a particularly attractive morph to me.
You're right. Funny enough, I have the Turbo Teen promotional art in the background where it's about a series about a boy who turns into a car, but the series is really infamous because of, I guess, just like how people crop the middle section of your sequence covers, people crop the middle section of a boy turning to a car, and it just like looks like pure nightmare horror feel when it's supposed to be a comedic cartoon show.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can understand that being hard.
Fantastic.
Actually, related to your work, being an artist and doing cover artist and art block, I think one issue for me was I've done some work for comic covers, but having to do like a tight time frame. You have 3 days to get a cover done, and you just aren't feeling the vibe of what was assigned to you. Like, how do you get around that? How do you just push through?
I just recognize it's unpredictable when the magic will strike. When I look at my own work, I've done, hundreds of covers, something like 2,000 pieces of art over the years. And, one or two will turn out fabulous. The rest of them will be right in the middle. And then, one or two of them will be duds. And it's really hard to know, what is going to turn out to be something fabulous. And it isn't always just a matter of time. I think if you give additional time to any cover, it can arguably be better, but it won't necessarily be, your best work of the year. So, sometimes you just wake up in the middle of the night and it's like, that's it. That's a fantastic idea. And,
Yeah.
every now and then I've had, ideas just come to me in whole cloth that turned out to be really great. And and other ones, it's like I've put aside more time to give myself more time to look at other art pieces, try and get inspiration for it, and it still doesn't turn out to be something great. So my answer to that is just to keep plugging away, and realize that no matter how hard you work, some of the stuff is going to turn out to be not as good as you might have done. Most of it will turn out to be right in the middle, and then one or two a year will really be magic. So I kind of look for that one or two a year that is totally going to be magic. My wife and I have gone through this process of downsizing, and I had
Right.
hundreds of paintings, and a lot of them I was perfectly willing to part with. But, every now and then a painting, turns out to be something really marvelous and that I wouldn't part with. So, one way of getting beyond art block is just to say to yourself, I kind of keep plugging away, and some of it will turn out really great. Some of it will turn out not so great, but I'm going to be working through this process of becoming the best artist I can become.
I think that's fantastic advice. And I guess maybe a final question from my end. Obviously, as part of kind of your legacy, one of the things you've done now is you do a lot of teaching. And I was just curious if that was something that you felt was a natural fit, or if it's something that you really grew into.
It's something I grew into. I got offered the chance to teach, and I took it, and then I slowly realized, as you get older as an artist, you're not around young artists, and one way to keep yourself fresh, to sort of keep yourself in touch with what's going on in the contemporary art world is to teach. You have contact with these younger people. You can pass on the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, and you can sort of get that energy and remind yourself of the excitement of being a young artist just starting out. So I've grown into being a better teacher, I think, over the years, just by learning, how much I love to be around the students.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I have one final question to wrap things up. You spent your whole career doing artwork for other people's ideas and properties. Is there any personal dream project original to yourself that you always wanted to work on and currently working on?
I had an unusual opportunity for Amazing Stories magazine. And they called me up and they said, if you had any ideas that have to do in the fantasy area that you've always wanted to do. And I did 2 covers for them. And one of them is that Wizard in the Subway. That was actually a rejected cover for the Wizard of 4th Street. And I still had the sketch and I submitted it to the art director. And they said, great. And, I'd always wanted to do that cover. The other one was St. Joan burning the computer. I'd had that idea and I'd always wanted to do it. And I'd never had a book come across that seemed particularly appropriate. And one of the artists who I really admire is this guy named Ang. And his name is spelled Ingres, Ingres. And actually, my favorite cover that still hangs right as you walk into the hall at our house was for Ben Bova's Orion, and it's a god sitting on a throne, and at his feet is a spaceman, and that was that again was just a cover that I always wanted to do. But I guess to an extent, I have an illustrator's attitude of, I get my inspiration from what the client gives to me. And, as a fine artist, you've got to produce that inspiration all yourself. You've got to determine, what you want to do. But yeah, I've never in particular had that in me. I've always found a way to express myself through the assignments that I've gotten.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're basically at time here, but I want to make sure we still left some time, David, for you just to kind of plug your Etsy store and all of those good things before we sign off, because we've really appreciated you giving us your time so generously and coming to the convention and chatting. So if people are looking for you online, where can they find you?
Oh, sure. On Etsy, I'm at Animorphs Artist, and I've got Wizard Artist, and I've also done a series of covers for Steve Miller and Sharon Lee in the Layden universe. And I have a store for that. I think it's Layden Artist. And I also have a store that sells my original sketches on Etsy, and that's just David Mattingly or Mattingly Artist. I should know all this before I have it. And let me just add, anybody who orders an Animorphs print, send me a little note. There's a note at the bottom of there. There's the ability to send a little note to me on Etsy. If you do that, I'll send you a free signed poster of this flying cycle over the Grand Canyon. It's one of my favorite pieces. So I'll send you that for free along with anything you order, as long as you send me a note that you saw me on this broadcast.
That's really generous of you, and we really appreciate that.
Well, thanks.
Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank
Yeah,
you
and
so much. And
Yeah,
thank you so much for your interest in the Animorphs art. I love those covers, and I'm very happy to see they've been discovered by this community.
fantastic. All right. Thank you so much, David, and thank you so much, everyone. We are looking forward to the next event, but in the meantime, hope you all had a good time, and we'll see you back here again soon.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Enjoy your vacation.
You bet.
Fantastic. So